Join me on my journey as I explore wealth in all areas of life. I'm your host, Mindie Kniss, and this is The Lucrative Society. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of The Lucrative Society. I am delighted to have my friend Michael Fishman with me here today. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mindie. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
You are most welcome. I am excited that we finally get to have this conversation. I know you've been on my list for quite a long time. I wanted to begin with just kind of the concept of this show. Myself, in my own life, I have had a lot of challenges with money and money mindset and all of this, which really inspired the creation of this show. I wanted to ask you about your wealth evolution. If you could just bring me back, like, where did you start? Like, what was growing up for you like with money? And then lead me up until today and your thoughts on money.
Wow. Awesome. I don't know if you announce it to your listeners, but we didn't talk about this in advance. So this is kind of fun. We're on the high wire, right?
I like putting people on that.
So I grew up in Queens in New York City in a 2-bedroom apartment with my parents and my brother. My brother and I shared a bedroom. I think by any description, a modest environment. There really wasn't a lot of discussion about money. I've never known what my parents earned, and to this day I don't. I know how they live. I can see and experience how they live, and as their means increase, having a second home or being able to eat out more. I mean, the kinds of things when I was a kid that you just know things are getting better. But it was I would say a modest upbringing. Like I said, not a lot of discussion, just the experience of what was going on, which had a lot to do with scarcity, either real or perceived. And went to college. My parents paid for my university tuition. So I graduated without any student debt. And I worked a summer job during college, really just because I wanted to. So that, obviously things got easier at that time, more so than for a lot of people. And then in my career, always had a sense, and even as I started working in the early and mid 80s, I was reading Money Magazine, and I had a sense of that it was important to save and compounded interest and mutual funds, and to get my arms around the tools and the methods and the commitment that it would take to have that be a meaningful process, and to have to have savings, and also to over the years also, and we're friends and you've seen this, but I've made certain choices that some might have said were expensive or, let's just say costly, that, sometimes you want to honor yourself. Sometimes you want to make a choice, not to impress anybody else, but to honor or pamper or acknowledge yourself for a job well done, or a lot of years of hard work, or the fruition of a particular goal. And so, there have been times where I bought a luxurious car just because I expected to have return on investment on it, just in my own mindset.
Yeah. It's
just that I felt good that I accomplished it, and it just was something that I allowed myself to do for me. So I'm dancing around with the answer, but I hope that's a good kickoff.
So let's talk about your work now. Like, what are you doing that has allowed you some of those luxurious cars or whatever other choices that you've made? I'd love for my listener to know a little bit more about your work.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I mean, principally two things. Number one, an advisory practice, which I've had my entire life, and in some different iterations. But I advise founders, and depending on the size of the company, the founder and or their marketing lead. And the categories are almost always something to do with health, nutrition, food, supplements, apps, wearables, the new technology in health, diagnostics, home testing, telehealth, those kinds of things. And then I lead a founder community called Consumer Health Summit, which I created in 1994. that's an invitational group of founders who really work with not only prowess and business acumen, but also purpose and really deep heart, really deep calling to make the world a healthier and happier place. And also the kind of people that when they gather are really committed to the greater good and really are always wanting to help each other versus, get things from each other and come into our gatherings like a hunter, but much more like a contributor. So leading and curating that group and advising founders are the two principal things that I do.
Would you be willing to share, and I get it that I'm sort of putting you on the spot by asking you this, but one of the things that I found so amazing with you was your work with Consumer Health Summit, because I remember at one point, this was just in the last couple of years, somebody had told us, or Sean had told me, that there were X number of years until, I don't remember if it was till it was even profitable or what you had done, but I was like, that is extraordinary. So I wonder if you could just share in as much detail as you'd like that growth.
Yeah, well, I'll try to address what it is you may be thinking of. But the first 2 or 3 years, it was a private dinner for maybe 15 or 20 people in the mid 90s. Well, here's the thing. The first 10 iterations, it was always invitation only, but the first 10 years, nobody paid. Because I was working for an agency, and so the agency sponsored it, paid for it. It was always Michael's thing. It was never branded with me, but I always put it together. And I always invited the people, and I always led the event and so forth, led the gathering. But the first 10 years, while it was invitation only, there was no charge to attend. But because it was so tightly curated and admission was only offered, to people that were a business and a cultural fit for the group, it wasn't like people showed up for free and didn't care, right? They knew they were at something special. So the first 2 or 3 years was a dinner, and then we moved into kind of a one-day gathering of speakers and programming, like from morning till the end of the afternoon. And we were probably in the 40 to 50 person range at that time. And there were many years where I thought 50 was like the absolute biggest this thing could ever get. Because it's not a seminar, it's a discussion.
Right.
And you can't have a discussion with 500 people. At least I don't think you can. But these days with Zoom and breakouts, maybe. But so it became a 1 day, and then it became a 2 day, and then at some point after 10 years, we started charging, which I think was $600 for the very first time we ever charged, which was probably in the late 90s. And then it became, people were clamoring for a second day, so we did 2 days. So anyway, fast forward. It went from New Jersey to Connecticut to Paradise Valley, Arizona, and we've pivoted and elevated the experience in so many wonderful ways. Not only in terms of the community, but in terms of the experience and the hospitality and the venue. So what started as an invitational dinner for 15 or 20 people in 1994, various iterations, and today we have a beautiful community, a high alumni rate, a wonderful, prestigious faculty, some of whom are recurring, that return year after year, and pretty well known that it's a $10,000 investment to be there. And so, but as I say, and as you may have heard me say in the past, things are either valuable or they're expensive. It's one or the other. Right? So if it's valuable, irrespective of the price, it meant the experience or the tangible return on investment was there, right? So you could pay $2,000 for an event and have it be a waste of time.
Right.
You could pay a multiple of 10,000. Many people charge way more than we do, and that's valuable. So it's not about the number, it's just about the curation of the community. And having a group of generous people that have not only the heart, but the ability to support each other.
I love that. And it speaks volumes to you as well as the leader, as the visionary of that experience, taking this small event and turning it into something that is let's just say a lot bigger than that, which is awesome.
And by the way, I'm sorry. We do admit only 100 each year. So there is. I mentioned, how do you have a conversation with 500 people before? I still don't know how you do that, but we do limit our admissions to 100. So so we're able to facilitate. I'm able to foster and facilitate, beautiful discussions and that intimacy and that connection that just is what that type of gathering and others like it are really known for.
Yeah, and you're able to maintain that at that level, which I think is awesome. So let's jump into the world of happiness. I'm looking at money and wealth and also happiness and saying, how can we bring all this stuff together? Sean and I used to joke all the time that there were a lot of wealthy people that we knew, or not necessarily wealthy, but they had a lot of money and they were miserable. And then the flip side was also true. People that were so filled with joy but didn't have a lot of money. So we're like, how can we do both? Because I'm fairly certain that that is possible and probable with the right mentors, resources, etc. So for you in your life, what is happiness to you?
Yeah. It brings to mind so many quotes, like happiness is an inside job, which I think is accurate.
Yep.
Happiness isn't, is loving what you have, so there's just so many people that have framed that in many beautiful, valuable ways. I believe we can develop happiness to its truest and fullest expression and its fullest experience. And I think for every human being, the foundation of happiness, the foundation of the experience of happiness, anything good like joy, I think starts with being able to unplug or remove any frame of victimization that we may have from prior years of our life. Because if not, we're walking around with a frame or a self-assessment. And look, everybody has their stuff, right? We know that. I mean, somebody's mother was 5 minutes late picking them up at school. That doesn't sound tragic, but for that person, that was meaningful. They made it mean something about them. And of course, there's other things that happen that are terrible and real violations. But whatever those things are for each person, it's important to remove any frame of victimization and really look at the event as an event and to strip away the meaning and the negative self-assessment and the kinds of things that become a part of the blueprint of virtually our entire life, or the lens in front of our eyes, whatever metaphor you like. It's your blueprint. It's the lenses on your eyes. It's, Anais Nin said, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So, with respect to happiness, I think happiness, joy, all those wonderful experiences and feelings start with what I just described. And I think that's the human race. We need to override the factory settings called our brain.
Yes.
and get that degree of consciousness. And so, once that happens, our creativity blossoms, our purpose blossoms, our self-love can develop over time. I don't think these are overnight phenomenon. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times it takes, years to acknowledge oneself, to fall in love with oneself after you've stopped blaming or assessing yourself in a negative frame, right? So I think that's the foundation. And then happiness, just like success, gets defined by the individual. For some people, happiness is a concert, or seeing art, or hearing expression, or being with somebody they love, or being by themselves. You can relate to that, I know.
What, me?
Out in the desert.
Yep.
Or on a mountaintop, right? So I think that's different for every person, but just getting quiet, as my partner Elaine would say, and really experiencing what is within you unencumbered by that entire past that we hope never happens again.
Yeah.
Right. And then, happiness and the other kinds of things that are wonderful begin to reveal themselves and begin to blossom.
What are some of the specifics for you? I mean, we joke about me being alone and being on a mountaintop, which is 100% true. What are some of the ways, like when or where do you find yourself most happy?
Definitely with, with Elaine, with friends, sharing experiences, sharing not only triumphs and successes, but challenges. Hearing and experiencing the self-expression of other people, whether that's through music or art, being the recipient of self-expression,
Mm.
words, music, art, that to me is, the real oxygen in many respects, is creativity, art, and self-expression. I love that.
I almost would add food to that because I know that you and I have shared many a really good quality meal oftentimes and had that, ability to converse and express and all of that along with the food. So that would definitely be on my list.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a, we talk about like the money and over the course of time, and for me, there's also food over the course of time, and not just an appreciation of fine food and the ability to have it, or the wherewithal to sometimes go out and pay for it, but or more than sometimes, just emotional attachments to food, and feeling particular emotions, good, some pleasant, some not pleasant, and how those emotions relate to the eating and the kinds of food that let's say I would reach for, the time of day. Like, why reach for something sweet? Why eat at midnight? Why do these various things, which are less than ideal? So that there's, I think everybody. I certainly have a food journey, um, which I'm working on all the time.
Awesome. So, Michael, you came to mind recently for me because I was teaching a class on boundaries, and somebody in the class asked a question, and the question was essentially about integrity. And he was saying, okay, if I have stated something, whatever that is, and then maybe however long later, I find that maybe that's not the best thing for me. What do I do? Because I did state that, so I want to be in integrity. But in the context of this boundary class, I was also talking about, not tolerating people's poor behavior and things like that. So this guy was like, what do I do? And you came to mind because I know there have been, and we've had conversations about this, there have been situations in your life where there was that struggle between the integrity of what you stood for and then also of what you knew you deserved. And I wondered, and you don't have to go into any specific if you don't want to, although I welcome you to if you choose to, how did you come to terms with that inner struggle of integrity, like what you had said versus holding a boundary?
Well, it's a wonderful question. Look, certain matters of integrity are black and white, like keeping your word. If I say I'll be there at 2:00 and I'm there at 2:05, it might be tragic, might not be, but that's a break of integrity, especially if I didn't tell you in advance that there was any chance of a delay. If I say I'll do something and I don't do it, that's a breach. If I say I won't do it and I do it, that's a breach. Then there's an area of integrity which would come under the heading of being true to yourself.
Yeah.
That's different than a factual breach of time or a particular act or a particular behavior. So being true to yourself is, and look, you could say, well, being true to myself when I, knock people off their bicycle. Well, that's not a great thing to do, right? So there's stuff that you could do to be true to yourself that's just plain out wrong. But you can appreciate, I know, that there's, under the heading of be true to yourself, there's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
And so when you and stop me anytime I'm not answering the question, but when you do make a promise or make a commitment, there can be a time when that no longer serves you. And there might not be anything egregious about it. it might just not serve you any longer, or there could be something egregious like that. There's a party or a person that's dishonoring you in some way, right? So, and without specific details, but I've been in situations, as you know, where I've given my word, and over time, that agreement turned into something that felt nourishing at the beginning and turned into a gross disservice to me. At which point, it's being true to yourself, it's honoring yourself, and actually loving yourself to communicate the discontinuation of that agreement or that commitment or whatever action or behavior you promised to maintain. It's then over. So you don't maintain commitments to your own significant detriment over long. I mean, look, people and their relationships, they committed at the beginning, and at some point it wasn't right anymore. It wasn't the right thing. So is that helpful?
It is. And I want to go even just a little bit deeper, because I think that you have an answer based on your experiences that other people might be seeking. And that is, and let's just use a hypothetical example. Let's say somebody has committed in a marriage to, till death do us part. And then maybe there's some abuse in that marriage. So then the person has this inner struggle of like, this is what I said, and I said that with integrity. But to your point, that's also clearly not serving that person because they're being abused, which, nobody would say that's a good thing. So how did you, or how would one come to terms with that inner struggle? And how do you know when it's black and white or when it's gray?
Yeah. Well, I look there. The test is different for every person. The criteria would be different for every person. But I think in general, here's just something that most people can locate themselves inside of. When loving another person when loving someone is tantamount to not loving yourself, that's a relationship with a gross imbalance of energy or integrity, or however you would say it. But the ability to look at oneself in the mirror and be proud of one's choices, in every area, that your choices are excellent, that your choices are honoring you. When you could choose, you're choosing a car is one thing, choosing a person is another.
Right.
And so if you've made a choice of a person, whether that's intimate, whether that's business, whether that's partnership, whatever, that relationship has to honor you as long as it lasts. And when it doesn't, in whatever manner, and once again, it could be egregious, or it could just be a matter of two people can drift, right? There might not be anything quote unquote wrong. For who, and I think, like I said, I think most people can locate their life in this discussion in some way, some connection to another person. And, it can either be an affirmation of a relationship that you discontinued and maybe still have some lingering guilt or negative feelings about, or it could be about a relationship that's still in place that no longer serves you.
I think that's hugely helpful. So thank you for that.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a 4-part question that I ask all of our guests. I think you know what this is because you've heard this show before. It's called HERB, H-E-R-B. And the H, I would like to just take you through each part. The H is habits. What are some of your personal specific habits that if we were to implement them as someone listening to you, we may be able to achieve some of the things that you can achieve?
Mm-hmm. Well, just, a couple that are specific, like take supplements, get someone to help you choose the right ones, right? But, use supplements in your health routine, your health regimen. Avoid gluten, dairy, and sugar and processed foods. Err on the side of generosity.
I love that.
Like I recently decided that, if I get a coffee or, something in a shop, no matter what it costs, the minimum tip is $2. So it's a $3 coffee, it's a plus $2.
Right.
Because that's a human being that took time and effort and maybe even their purpose to be of service to you. And it doesn't break you, and it acknowledges that human being. So I think, and there's 100 ways you could err on the side of generosity, and it's mostly not about money. It's about being a generous human being and caring and being giving of oneself. So I think that's a habit.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. So those would be a few.
I love that. One of the things that Sean and I always used to do, and now I've continued doing, is when I go through the drive-through at Starbucks, I say, hey, put on the person behind me, on my tab. And it's really kind of cute because a lot of times the cashier will, like, especially if it's maybe a bigger order, like not just a coffee, it's maybe they had a sandwich too. And they're like, oh, well, it'll be, $14. I'm like, that's okay. Just put it on there anyway, but it's super cute. So I love that. Thank you for that.
Well, the other thing is, whether it's a tip, let's say a tip for a valet, a lady or gentleman who's parking your car, whatever. If you don't have the small bill, not their fault.
Right.
If it's a 5 or a 10 or a 20, that's the tip. It's never zero.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for being a model of that. So from the H to the E, E stands for environment. How do you set up your environment for your best work, your best creativity, your best productivity? What comes in or doesn't come into your environment?
Yeah. Well, I mix it up a little bit because I'm fortunate enough to live in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is, among other things, a resort town. So there are beautiful resorts with open air lounges and just beautiful places to sit and work, and it's peaceful, and it's generally quiet and not generally crowded, especially during the hotter months. So I really have the luxury, how people sometimes put on Facebook, like, this is my office this week, and you're looking at the ocean. So I have, that's a beautiful thing about where I live. So I mix it up. So when I pull out each morning, I just kind of give it a moment's thought of like 5 or 6 options, and I choose one. And so, and when I'm doing video meetings or meetings, Zoom or Skype or those sorts of things, I find those tend not to work in those public environments for lots of obvious reasons. So, I have a home office, and I can work with books behind me or on video or a beautiful piece of art, or, I have a couple of choices, in my home environment as well.
Nice. And I just, that I'm still celebrating your move to Scottsdale because Sean and I pushed hard for that for a long time. When I met you, you were still on the East Coast, and we were both very excited when you headed our direction. That was awesome.
Well, I'm carrying the torch because I'm now the chief recruiter for
I love it. I love that. and why not? It's such a great place. So the R in herb stands for resources. And one of the things that I like most about anybody that I meet is when they meet me and then they give me books. And you did that. So I was like, I already adore this guy. I don't know anything about him, but he's already top of my list because books are one of my favorite things on the planet. So resources could be books, but they could be coaches, mentors, programs, courses, whatever else. What are some of the resources that have really developed you into who you are and that you would recommend to others?
Well, there are a few books, but I'm happy to name a few. But what I really really cherish and value the most are quite a few individuals that I'm blessed and grateful to have in what I would call my inner circle, and just really dear friends. The kind of people you can call at 3 a.m. or say like, I need $1,000, and it'd be like, no questions. I don't think I've ever done either of those things, but I could. Right.
Right.
So just great people, great relationships, I think are the real wealth. not because they lead to financial abundance, which they do, but because they are so much more meaningful than anything to me. And also groups. I'm not in many groups, but many people know I'm in Joe Polish's group, and also leading and standing in front of my own group. I mean, that's an education and a nourishing experience to me as well. I don't take anything for granted, and certainly not the ability to stand in front of a room full of rock stars and dignitaries and just be knocked out. So, the fact that I have a group doesn't make me think I'm better, and certainly never take it for granted. So the group that I lead, Consumer Health Summit and Genius Network, and, just other informal gatherings. There's a wonderful author and educator and pretty well-known guy in New York named Ramit Sethi. And when I lived in New York, he and I hosted a dinner series for 2 years. And so, there was no agenda. We would split the bill every time. In 24 months, we did 22 dinners.
Nice.
And at the end of the first year, we invited the first year's guests, we invited up to a party at the end of the first year. And then at the end of the second year, we invited all 2 years of guests to a party. And then we put a bow on top, and we looked at each other. We said, we think we're done. And we were done with it. But it was a moment in time, so there's just so many special things that you can not only belong to with respect to people, but also create situations for yourself that are not only nourishing to you, but to everybody that participates. And so that, in terms of resources, for me, people would be number one. If I could recommend, 3 books would be
please do.
You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay.
100%, yes.
Setting the Table by Danny Meyer, the subtitle of which is The Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business, Any Business, and The Culture Code by Dr. Clotaire Rapaille.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm always like, which books are you going I wouldn't have let you not recommend some books. So I appreciate that.
I haven't read as many, a lot of people talk about the hundreds and thousands of books that they've read. I'm not in that club at all.
That's okay.
And sometimes I feel a little uncertain about that, but I have some books that have just made a massive difference in my thinking and in my relationships. And so those would be 3.
Yeah. And those are the ones that I want to know about. So awesome. So the B in HERB stands for beliefs. What are some of your core beliefs that allow you to see the world as you do, or allow you the success that you've had, anything? What are some of the core beliefs that make you who you are?
Another wonderful question. Thank you. Well, it's funny, the astronomer Neil Tyson recently shared a quote that was said by Edgar Mitchell, who was an astronaut for the United States Air Force, and I don't remember what year, probably in the 70s, and said something to the effect of, when you go into space and look back at the Earth, you don't see borders, you don't see divisions, you don't see any of these sorts of artificial constructs that are all, made by humans. And when I'm on an airplane, even though I'm not as high as the astronauts are, I remember that, and I look down and just think about that. So I think for me, in terms of a belief, to the extent possible, I think we all live in one home called the Earth, and it's important to safeguard that, not only for ourselves, but for the people and the animals that will follow us. I also think what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
I believe in karma. I'm very science oriented. It's, in many respects, like, if you can't show me in a lab or prove it, or, like in a scientific method, it's hard for me to embrace. But there are things that I do embrace that are just really areas of faith, and karma, and just the connectedness of all human beings would be, a few of those. Yeah.
Nice. I love that. Now, I also ask every guest to define wealth, your personal definition of wealth. And you said relationships are the real wealth. And I wonder if you can expand on that or add anything to that in terms of what is your personal definition of wealth?
Hmm. Well, if we really look at what most people associate with wealth, which I do too, not exclusively, but partly and significantly, it's money. Money and wealth are, in that respect, peace of mind, security, the wherewithal to reach for things that actually cost money. I mean, to have experiences that, I mean, the world is a big, beautiful place, but it's not free. Even just to go to other parts it doesn't cost anything to stand in another part of the world and look at that ocean or look at that mountain, but it costs money to get there.
Right. Good point.
Right. So there's a lot of things in the world that are free, but even moving around requires resources. And look, in many respects, and I forget who said it, I will always credit, but if I can remember, but wealth in many respects is loving what you have. And I actually think that loving what you have gives you more ability to create more. When you're dissatisfied with what you have, I think there's something called just like a healthy restlessness, I think, right? And, healthy restlessness maybe is a decent definition of the word ambition, right? I think it can be healthy to say, I love what I have, and now this is my new game, and I'm committed to this new level of whatever. But in many respects, wealth and happiness, I think, are related, to marry two words that you asked me about. So, what wealth is financial wherewithal, it's wealth of relationships, and it's also the full cup that you have in relationship to yourself. That's how I would say it right now. Later or tomorrow, it might be different.
Well, I think that's fantastic, especially in that when you were talking about the ambition and coming from a place of joy about that or happiness or fulfillment within that, if there wasn't that further looking ahead, there would be no growth. It's yes, being happy with what we have now, but also choosing to get uncomfortable again and go into that growth stage. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and I never said the term healthy restlessness before, but I actually kind of like it.
I kind of do too. I think it's a good one. So Michael, you have been and are tremendously helpful to me. You were to Sean just in our business sense. You're a brilliant guy in branding and marketing and just the way you think about things. So I would love to have my audience get to know you more. If they wanted to do that and they were interested in what you're up to, where would you like them to go? Where would you like to send them?
Yeah. Well, thank you for a wonderful question. Well, whether they're listening now or 20 years from now, I'm sure, my website's michaelfishmanconsulting.com. And for my invitational community, my founder community is consumerhealthsummit.com, Twitter and Facebook. I mean, I'm pretty easy to find and I'm very responsive. So those would be the two best places to have a look.
Perfect. And for the listener, all those links will be available at lucra.com in the transcript. So you can just go there for easy access to Michael Fishman. Michael, I just want to thank you for not only your time right now, but just your friendship over the many, many, many years. You were one of the first of Sean's friends that I met a long time ago. We ended up traveling sort of together a long time, like really early on in our relationship. And you've always just been a great blessing and, a true shoulder to lean on and just like an ear to listen. So I just want to send appreciation your way, and most especially for this time today.
Well, look, it's always been not only my pleasure and my honor, but a gift to me to, for our friendship and just the ability to be of any degree of support. So it always has been and always will be an honor. And this was a fun, super cool visit. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe to the Lucrative Society on iTunes, and please leave a review of the podcast. Visit lucra.com for transcripts and resources, or to become a member of the Lucrative Society, where I coach purpose-based entrepreneurs on business, mindset, and heartset. Lucra, where wealth equals well-being.